Good morning. Oh, it's an incredible thing to be here today and to be talking about what we're talking about today, because it really is a celebration of a huge community achievement. This is the first time since 2009 that we know our drinking water is not at risk from coal seam gas development. And that is purely because this community and other communities supporting us have stood up against this project and managed to get the government, or not the government, to get the Planning Assessment Commission to make the decision, a very common sense decision, the decision that was needed. And that really is, that's an enormous thing. I think it's still sort of sinking in. When we first started meeting, people were going, oh, this is just ridiculous. Of course a stop should be put to it. But to realise what you're up against through this campaign, to work and work day in, day out, and realise just how hard it is to get that common sense outcome, I think we really need to be celebrating what an enormous effort and achievement this has been by our community. I believe this is the first ever coal seam gas project to be rejected by the Planning Assessment Commission. And really it's no particular feature of that commission that means we got this outcome. So the Planning Assessment Commission so firstly the government approved the original project in 2009 under the previous government, but then under the current government in 2011, this project was actually modified to be a little bit larger. It was originally a 15-well project and then became a 16-well project in 2011. So the exact same body actually approved the expansion of this project in 2011. When the company actually passed their drilling deadlines, so this campaign has been so strong that the company has said they could not drill within the time frame they had approval for, and when they passed those deadlines, they put in that modification application, and the Department of Planning and Infrastructure actually recommended reapproval. They said this project's already been approved, there's clearly no problems with it, they reapproved things in 2011, of course it should be approved yet again. So really this is such an enormous outcome in the face of not yet seeing the legislative changes that are needed, but really seeing the power of a community to influence and get a common sense outcome. The other huge achievement that we found on Friday was, for the first time, we've got the Sydney Catchment Authority unequivocally saying coal seam gas mining should not be allowed to go ahead in drinking water catchment areas in our special areas. That's the first time they have come out and said that unequivocally. So in the past they've said they have concerns, they're worried about levels of industrial development, but actually for the first time, reading their submission to the Planning Assessment Commission, it was a more technical version of what we say day in, day out, that the risks when it comes to contaminated water leaking out into our catchment, that the risks from industrial development of our catchment and the risks from methane leakage in our catchment are simply unacceptable. So we now have a very powerful ally in this fight, and really I think we need to take some credit for emboldening people in the SCA to be able to take that position, because people in the SCA are actually employees of the state government, and it takes those people standing up against their employer to say this should not be allowed to go ahead, and that's a really wonderful thing, and a really wonderful thing for us to be able to get out and talk to more people in the community about, that the people charged with looking after our drinking water supplies are now saying this is completely unacceptable. I just wanted to go through a little bit of a potted history of the campaign. So in 2009 the project was first approved, and really no one in this community knew about it. It was only because Natasha Watson, an Otford resident, came across correspondence between a coal mining company and Apex Energy in the north of the Illawarra that wasn't supposed to be public, that actually talked about the plans to develop the drinking water catchment for coal seam gas. And that's how our community found out about this project. And in response to that, Stop CSG, there was certainly the campaign started in the Illawarra. Stop CSG Illawarra launched in early 2011, and immediately people in this community came together to try and do something about this, because the risks from coal seam gas are already so absurd, and to find out that this project had been approved in and across the drinking water catchment for Greater Sydney was just an appalling situation to be in. In 2011, still in 2009, we actually had an unequivocal promise from Barry O'Farrell, who was not in government at the time, was running in the election, and he said, "The next Liberal National Government will ensure that mining cannot occur in any water catchment area and will ensure that mining leases and mining exploration permits reflect that common sense. No ifs, no buts, a guarantee." That was the pre-election promise, and he was subsequently elected. In 2011, now in government, we had the Liberal Party approve the expansion of our project. So in 2011, we had the 16th well approved on our project despite that pre-election promise. So we still didn't have a legislative framework in place. That meant that well could not be approved. In 2012, my notes make no sense, I'm just going to ditch them. In 2012, we actually won a freeze on the local project. So this was nothing lasting. It was actually largely due to the incompetence of the company, coupled with the fact that, coupled with the fact that they'd been unable to drill because of the level of community opposition here. So the company actually failed to submit their application to renew their licence on time. They were late by a few days. Now the way coal seam gas mining is approved, you've got two levels of approval. Firstly, you have your licence area. So imagine you wanted to build a house, you've got your land. It's like that. That's your area in which you have the sole right to develop that area for coal seam gas. The second part is your development application, which is your roads, your pipelines, your wells. And so they had failed to renew one of their licences. Now coal seam gas, the way the legislation is written at the moment, with a coal seam gas licence, you just put in a notice saying I'd like to renew, and the government has to renew it. It's actually, the government at that point can't, under the legislation, just say, no, you're not going to do it unless they've found a breach of the licence. It simply goes on, but you have to lodge that paperwork. But because of that, we were actually in limbo in this community, because we had this project that still was technically approved, but they couldn't drill at this time because they didn't have the licence. And so they couldn't drill, which was fabulous, but they needed to go back to the Planning Assessment Commission and try and get an extension on that development application. So really, what went back to the Planning Assessment Commission was the exact same project. So nothing new, a project that had already been approved in across two different decisions. It went back to the Planning Assessment Commission. So to have this outcome, and that Planning Assessment Commission met in February this year. If you read the Planning Assessment Commission's website, they expect communities need to wait about 2 weeks to hear the outcome of their inquiry. 5 months later, we got that outcome. And I think I was in absolute shock because the legislation hasn't changed at the moment. But really that's such an enormous credit to this community, because there were hundreds of submissions against approval from this community, and person after person after person stood up at that Planning Assessment Commission and said, we will not let this go ahead. Whatever your decision, we will not let this go ahead. And so it put those individuals in a position where they really, obviously, at this stage we can say obviously, they couldn't reapprove it at this time. Now, just to get a little bit of perspective, because today absolutely should be a celebration, to know that tomorrow we're not going to have coal seam gas mining starting in the drinking water catchment for Greater Sydney. That's a huge achievement, but it's also an achievement we have to keep in perspective, because at the start of the meeting, Chris was going through what we stand for, what we set up, what goals did we set up around, and they were for a freeze on the industry statewide for a Royal Commission. That is a precautionary approach. We need to understand the industry before it can develop, for a ban in our drinking water catchment, and for a ban on fracking. And we haven't yet achieved any one of those three things, unfortunately. The other thing to say is that Apex Energy still holds the two licences related to this development, and the whole of the Illawarra is actually blanketed in coal seam gas exploration licences. Now, what that means is that companies are obliged to drill for coal seam gas. So if you own a licence, you can't just own a licence and do nothing with it. If you have a licence, you have to explore for coal seam gas, or you have to give the licence back to the government. So we are still blanketed in licences, and we need to be conscious that we're going to see new development applications in this area for coal seam gas. So we can breathe a huge sigh of relief at the same time as we have to be vigilant about coal seam gas development in this area. The other thing I would say is that even if we were free of coal seam gas licences in the Illawarra, this is still a much broader issue than the Illawarra community. This campaign never set up just to protect the Illawarra. It wasn't just a not in my backyard campaign. It was about the protection of land and water for communities everywhere. And that's why we stand for these broader goals, the freeze on the industry. That's not just in the Illawarra. The other thing I wanted to say is that the Chief Scientist Review, so ostensibly the key reason the Planning Assessment Commission gave for stopping this at this time was that the Chief Scientist Review is still pending. So the New South Wales Chief Scientist, the government has actually tasked them with reviewing coal seam gas. But the huge problem with that review is the terms of reference. So the terms of reference, there is one part of that actually relates to coal seam gas development in drinking water catchment areas. But that one point is not an if question, you know, if coal seam gas mining can be done safely in these areas, it's a how question. How can this, you know, what is best practice around coal seam gas development in drinking water catchment areas? So I don't think we can have a particularly high expectation that that review is going to push for change at the government level. That change is still very much dependent on us. We need to make sure it's still coming across to government that we still want to see a ban so that we're not facing another proposal like this that we have to stand up and fight again as a community. I just wanted to give two little updates that are unrelated to the project overall. We've had a lot of people getting in touch with us because there's a drill rig in Helensburgh at the moment. People panicking, thinking that's the beginning of coal seam gas. It's not a coal seam gas rig. It's actually a rig that's being used by Peabody Metropolitan in the coal mine. So just to allay people's fears, if you see, I mean, always contact us if you see a drill rig, but the drill rig that's currently up there with the Peabody Metropolitan site isn't related to coal seam gas. And the second thing I just wanted to say is that, I don't know if you've been seeing, but the industry has changed time and time again the reason they tell us we need coal seam gas. So it started off as it's clean and green and that's why we need it. It then went to we need it for jobs, it's great in terms of climate change. But as these arguments get knocked down, the industry keeps changing its tack. And the latest one has been New South Wales is going to run out of gas and your gas prices are going to go up because of these campaigners. They're the two things we're being told at the moment. And a really significant report actually came out a couple of weeks ago from the Australia Institute where they researched gas prices and gas availability in Australia. I don't want to talk about the we'll run out of gas thing too much because it's absolutely absurd. In Bass Strait alone, conventional gas, there's enough to power Australia for 150 years. So, and of course, there's a whole myriad of alternatives to using gas in general. So it's just an absurd proposition to say we need the gas or New South Wales will run out of gas if we don't develop unconventional gas in Australia. The second thing to say, and it's not a particularly complex thing, but Australia historically has actually enjoyed really low gas prices, and the key reason is it's been a domestic industry. So we've had a small amount of gas production for the domestic market. But all of a sudden we've got the expansion of an industry for export. So 83% of the coal seam gas industry is slated for export. We're getting huge LNG, liquefied natural gas conversion plants to take the gas overseas and sell it overseas. And what that does to gas prices is it massively inflates it because those international markets are paying more for the gas and they're not going to sell it to less for us here than they sell it to people for overseas. So essentially we are starting to experience a rapid increase in gas prices that will really increase with the completion of the Gladstone LNG plant, and that is entirely because of the development of this industry. So the industry, and actually often backed by the government, keeps telling us something that is fundamentally backwards. The truth is our gas prices are going to go up, but they're going to go up because of the expansion of this industry, not because campaigners are trying to protect our land and our water. I just wanted to finish today to reflect back on some of the risks, because we really need to keep the fire in our belly and we really need to support other communities who are staring down the barrel of development approvals. All of the risks from coal seam gas still stand, and the risks from coal seam gas always, you know, there was a huge concern in this community because this project was in our drinking water catchment areas, but the reality is that communities where this has been developed are still suffering. And the Tara Rural Estates is such an example of this. So one of the first communities in Australia to be developed in terms of coal seam gas, and there are kids being airlifted out of that area with symptoms consistent with methane exposure. And that community has no recourse because no one measured data before the coal seam gas field set up. So they say, yes, the methane in this area is incredibly high, but maybe it was always incredibly high. Maybe it has nothing to do with the development of coal seam gas here. And we're seeing people there who can light their bore water on fire. We need to be standing with communities like that because we are talking about a tiny community with very few residents, and they need people in urban areas, here in the Illawarra, people in Sydney, standing up because we need to protect those communities as well. So I just want to finish on that. I think the campaign here has to go on. We need to make sure we actually start to see in legislation the kind of protections that mean communities are safe, that mean we're not sitting here thinking, we've had this win, but when is the next one coming? We need to make sure that our land, our water and our future is protected from the development of this industry. Thanks.